When I saw my husband hand over the keys to my brand new Mercedes to his 22-year-old secretary, I felt my world shatter. But what I did next made him realize he had just destroyed his life for a girl who didn't even know how to drive stick shift. I'm Lillian, and 3 months ago, I discovered that my husband of 8 years had been living a double life that would have made any soap opera writer jealous. But this isn't just another cheating husband story. This is about how I turned his betrayal into the most expensive lesson of his life. My life before everything fell apart was picture perfect, at least from the outside. I lived in a stunning colonial home in Westchester County, complete with marble countertops, a wine cellar, and a 3-car garage that housed my Mercedes C-Class, David's BMW, and his vintage Mustang that he babied more than he ever babied me. I worked as a senior marketing executive at a Fortune 500 company, pulling in 6 figures while David ran his own consulting firm from our home office. We had what everyone called the perfect marriage. David would bring me coffee every morning, we'd take weekend trips to the Hamptons, and our social media was filled with pictures of romantic dinners and vacation selfies. Our friends constantly told us how lucky we were, how they wished they had what we had. If only they knew what was happening behind our mahogany front door. The first crack in our perfect facade appeared on a Tuesday evening in September. I had come home early from a client meeting that got canceled, expecting to surprise David with takeout from his favorite Italian place. Instead, I found him in his office, door closed, speaking in hushed tones on the phone. The conversation stopped abruptly when he heard my heels clicking on the hardwood floors. "Hey, honey," he said, his voice slightly higher than usual. "I thought you had that late meeting tonight." "Client rescheduled," I replied, studying his face. "Who were you talking to?" "Just a potential client," he answered quickly, but something in his eyes didn't match his words. "Nothing important." Over the next few weeks, these moments became more frequent. David started working later, taking calls in private, and being unusually protective of his phone. When I asked about it, he'd brush off my concerns with explanations about confidential client information. As someone who worked in marketing, I understood professional discretion, but this felt different. This felt personal. The second red flag came when I noticed charges on our joint credit card that didn't make sense. Expensive dinners at restaurants we'd never been to, purchases from Victoria's Secret when he hadn't bought me lingerie in years, and hotel charges in the city when he claimed to be working from home. When I brought these up, David became defensive, accusing me of being controlling and paranoid. "Can I take a client to dinner without you interrogating me?" he snapped one evening when I questioned a $300 charge at a steakhouse. This is exactly why I didn't want to share credit cards in the first place. His reaction was so out of character that it left me speechless. David had never raised his voice at me before, never made me feel like I was being unreasonable for asking basic questions about our finances. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling wondering when my husband had become a stranger. The breaking point came on a Friday morning that started like any other. I was getting ready for work, applying my makeup in our ensuite bathroom when David walked in, already dressed in his best suit. "I need to borrow your car today," he said casually, adjusting his tie in the mirror behind me. "My car?
Why?
What's wrong with your BMW? It's making that noise again. I'm taking it to the shop this afternoon, but I have an important client meeting this morning. You can take the Mustang." I turned to look at him, mascara wand still in my hand. "David, you know I can't drive stick shift. We've been through this 100 times. Then take an Uber," he said with a shrug that seemed too casual, too practiced. "The company will reimburse you." Something cold settled in my stomach. In 8 years of marriage, David had never been so dismissive of my needs, so cavalier about inconveniencing me. But what choice did I have? I was already running late, and arguing would only make things worse. "Fine," I said, handing him my keys. "But I need my car back by tonight. I have dinner with my parents, remember?" "Of course," he said, kissing my cheek quickly. "I'll have it back by 5. He didn't have it back by 5. He didn't have it back by 6 or 7 or 8. My calls went straight to voicemail. My texts remained unanswered. I ended up canceling dinner with my parents and taking an Uber home, fury building with every mile. When I walked into our house at 9:30 that evening, David was sitting on the couch watching television as if nothing had happened. My Mercedes was nowhere to be seen. "Where's my car?" I demanded, not bothering with pleasantries. "Oh, that," he said without looking away from the screen. "The client meeting ran really late. I had to leave it at the office. I'll pick it up tomorrow." "You left my car at your office?" "David, that makes no sense. Your office is in our house." Finally, he turned to look at me, and I saw something in his eyes I'd never seen before. Guilt mixed with irritation, like a child caught in a lie but angry about having to explain himself. I meant the client's office. "Look, Lillian, it's not a big deal. You can get it tomorrow." But I knew he was lying. I could see it in the way he wouldn't meet my eyes, the way his hands fidgeted with the remote, the way his voice had that same higher pitch from weeks ago. My husband was lying to my face about my own car, and he was doing it badly. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I was going to find out exactly what David was hiding, and I was going to find out on my own terms. I had built a successful career by being thorough, analytical, and strategic. It was time to apply those same skills to my marriage. The next morning, while David was in the shower, I quietly photographed his phone screen when a text notification lit it up. The message was from someone named Chloe, and it simply read, "Thanks for letting me borrow the Benz last night. You're the best." My hands shook as I processed what I was seeing. David hadn't left my car at any office. He had given it to someone named Chloe, a woman whose name I had never heard in 8 years of marriage, who was apparently comfortable enough with my husband to borrow my $30,000 car overnight. I spent the weekend in a strange state of calm that I now recognize with shock. David retrieved my car Saturday afternoon, claiming he'd gotten a ride from a colleague to pick it up from the client's office. He acted completely normal, even suggesting we go out to dinner to make up for the inconvenience. I played along, smiling and nodding while my mind raced with plans. On Monday morning, I called in sick to work for the first time in 2 years. Instead of going to my office, I drove to a small detective agency I'd found online, run by a former NYPD officer named Maria Santos. Maria specialized in matrimonial investigations, and her website was filled with testimonials from women who had discovered the truth about their cheating husbands. "I need to know who Chloe is," I told Maria, sitting across from her in a small, cluttered office that smelled like coffee and determination. "I need to know everything." Maria was a no-nonsense woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that had clearly seen too much. She listened to my story without judgment, taking notes and asking pointed questions about David's recent behavior patterns. "How long has this been going on?" she asked. "I'm not sure. Maybe a few months?" "The suspicious behavior started around July." "And you said he runs his business from your home office?" "Yes, he's had the same clients for years." I thought I knew his whole schedule. Maria leaned back in her chair, studying me carefully. "Lillian, in my experience, when a man starts lending his wife's car to another woman, we're not talking about a new relationship. This has probably been going on longer than you think." Her words hit me like ice water. Not only was David cheating, but he'd been doing it for months, maybe longer, right under my nose in the house we shared, using the money we both earned, driving the car I paid for. "What do you need from me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "Give me a week. I'll follow him, document everything, and get you the evidence you need." "But Lillian," she paused, her expression serious, "are you prepared for what we might find? Because once you know the truth, you can't unknow it." I thought about David's lies, about the credit card charges, about how he'd looked me in the eye and made me feel crazy for asking reasonable questions. I thought about 8 years of marriage that might have been built on deception. "I'm ready," I said, and I meant it. Maria worked quickly and efficiently. By Wednesday, she had identified Chloe Morrison, a 22-year-old administrative assistant at a marketing firm downtown. By Friday, she had photographs of David and Chloe having lunch at expensive restaurants, shopping together in Soho, and entering a boutique hotel in Manhattan. But the photograph that broke my heart was taken Saturday afternoon. David and Chloe walking out of a jewelry store on Fifth Avenue, David carrying a small bag with the store's distinctive logo. The same store where he'd bought my engagement ring 8 years ago. "There's more," Maria said gently when she presented me with the evidence folder. I checked the hotel records. They've been meeting there twice a week for the past 4 months. Always the same suite, always paid for with a credit card in David's name. For months. While I was working late to build our future, while I was planning our anniversary dinner, while I was researching vacation destinations for us to visit together, David was building a second life with a woman barely out of college. "What about my car?" I asked, though I dreaded the answer. "He's been letting her use it regularly. My contact at the parking garage near her apartment has seen the Mercedes there overnight at least a dozen times in the past month." The betrayal was complete. Not only was David cheating, but he was using my car to facilitate his affair. Every time I'd driven that Mercedes after one of Chloe's overnight visits, I'd been sitting where his mistress had sat, touching surfaces she had touched, completely oblivious to the violation. That evening, I sat in my home office, the same office where David conducted his business, and I made a plan. I wasn't going to confront him immediately. I wasn't going to break down crying or throw his clothes on the lawn or key his precious Mustang. I was going to be strategic, calculated, and absolutely devastating. David had made one crucial mistake in his deception. He had underestimated me. The first phase of my plan began Monday morning. I called my lawyer, Patricia Williams, a shark in Armani suits who had handled my employment contract when I joined the Fortune 500 company. Patricia specialized in high-net-worth divorces, and her reputation for protecting her clients' assets was legendary. "I need to understand what I'm working with," I told her, spreading Maria's photographs across her mahogany desk. "And I need to know my options." Patricia reviewed the evidence with the cool professionalism that made her one of the most sought-after attorneys in the city. "This is excellent documentation. Adultery, financial infidelity, and what appears to be conversion of marital property for personal use. In New York, this gives us significant leverage." "What do you mean by conversion?" "He's been using marital assets, including your car, to conduct and facilitate his extramarital affair. That's a misuse of community property that the court will take very seriously." Patricia explained that New York's equitable distribution laws meant that marital assets would be divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. David's adultery, especially when combined with his financial deception, could result in a significantly favorable settlement for me. "What about the house?" I asked. "The house is in both your names, but you've been the primary income earner. With this evidence, we can argue for you to retain the house and for David to buy out his share at current market value." "And his business?" Patricia smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant expression. "His consulting business operates from the marital home, using marital resources. If he wants to keep it, he'll have to compensate you for your investment in its success." By the end of our meeting, I had a clear picture of exactly how much David's betrayal was going to cost him. But money wasn't enough. I wanted him to feel the same shock, the same humiliation, the same sense of having his world turned upside down that I had experienced. The second phase of my plan involved research that would have impressed my most demanding clients. I spent the next week learning everything I could about Chloe Morrison. Her social media profiles painted a picture of a young woman who loved luxury but couldn't afford it on an administrative assistant salary. Her Instagram was filled with photos of expensive dinners, designer handbags, and spa days that were clearly funded by someone else's money. More importantly, I discovered that Chloe had recently started posting photos of herself driving a Mercedes that looked suspiciously like mine. She'd even tagged the location of several high-end shopping centers, posing next to my car like it was her own personal chariot. The rage I felt seeing those photos was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. This woman wasn't just sleeping with my husband. She was living my life, using my car, spending my money, and broadcasting it all to her followers like some kind of trophy. But rage, I learned, could be a useful emotion when properly channeled. I began documenting everything. Every photo Chloe posted with my car. Every expensive restaurant tag that corresponded with charges on our credit card. Every designer item she flaunted that David had clearly purchased for her. I was building a case that would be impossible for David to deny or explain away. Meanwhile, I started making some purchases of my own. I opened a new checking account at a different bank, one that David had no access to. I began transferring money from our joint savings to this new account, carefully documenting each transfer as protection of marital assets pending legal proceedings. Patricia had assured me this was not only legal but advisable given David's proven financial deception. I also did something that felt simultaneously petty and empowering. I hired a private shopping consultant and bought myself a wardrobe that made my previous clothes look conservative. Designer dresses, luxury handbags, shoes that cost more than most people's rent. If David could spend our money on his mistress, I could spend it on myself. But my most important purchase was still to come. The third phase of my plan required patience that tested every limit I had. For 2 weeks, I acted like the perfect, unsuspecting wife. I made David his favorite dinners, asked about his day, even initiated intimacy when every fiber of my being wanted to recoil from his touch. I needed him to feel secure, to believe he was successfully managing his double life. During this time, I learned more about David's deception than I ever wanted to know. He had told Chloe that our marriage was essentially over, that we were staying together only for financial convenience until we could work out the details of our separation. He'd promised her that he would leave me within 6 months, as soon as he could arrange his affairs. What Chloe didn't know was that David had been telling versions of this same story for months, always with a new timeline, always with new excuses for why he couldn't leave immediately. Maria's investigation revealed that David was essentially living in a fantasy where he could maintain both relationships indefinitely. He's what we call a cake eater, Patricia explained during one of our strategy sessions. He wants to have his cake and eat it too. Keep the stability and financial benefits of marriage while enjoying the excitement of an affair. Men like this rarely leave voluntarily because they don't want to give up either situation. So, he was never actually planning to leave me? Probably not. He was probably planning to string both of you along for as long as possible. This revelation added another layer to my anger. David wasn't just cheating. He was manipulating both Chloe and me, lying to both of us about his intentions, keeping us both in emotional limbo for his own selfish benefit. The fourth phase of my plan began on a Thursday evening when David announced he would be working late the following day. By this point, I knew that working late was code for meeting Chloe at their usual hotel, probably followed by dinner at some restaurant I'd be paying for without knowing it. That's fine, I told him, not looking up from the magazine I was pretending to read. I might go shopping after work anyway. I've been thinking about getting a new car. A new car? David's voice carried just a hint of concern. What's wrong with the Mercedes? Nothing's wrong with it. I just want something different. Something more. Me. I could see him processing this, probably wondering how a new car purchase might complicate his arrangement with Chloe. But he couldn't object too strongly without raising suspicions. Well, maybe we should discuss it first. Budget and all that. Of course, I agreed sweetly. We'll definitely discuss it. What David didn't know was that I had already been car shopping for weeks. Not just browsing, but seriously shopping with pre-approved financing and a very specific vehicle in mind. Friday afternoon, while David was presumably telling Chloe more lies about our marriage, I was at a luxury car dealership signing papers for a brand new Porsche 911 Carrera. Midnight blue with cream leather interior, every possible upgrade, and a price tag that would make David's head spin. But the car was just the beginning of what I had planned for the evening. I drove my new Porsche to the boutique hotel where Maria had documented David and Chloe's meetings. The valet's eyes widened appreciatively as I handed him the keys, and I felt a surge of confidence that had been missing from my life for months. I'd chosen my outfit carefully. A black designer dress that hugged every curve, heels that added 4 inches to my height, and jewelry that sparkled under the hotel's elegant lighting. I looked like a woman who belonged in places like this, which was exactly the image I wanted to project. The hotel bar was dimly lit and sophisticated, the kind of place where wealthy people made deals and conducted affairs. I ordered a martini and positioned myself at a high-top table with a clear view of the elevators, checking my watch as I waited. At 7:15, exactly when Maria's surveillance had led me to expect, the elevator doors opened and David stepped out with Chloe beside him. She was younger than she looked in photos, with blonde hair and a dress that was probably more expensive than her monthly salary. They were holding hands and laughing, completely absorbed in each other. David looked happier than I'd seen him in months. His face was animated, his posture relaxed, his smile genuine in a way that made my chest ache. This was how he used to look at me back when we were first married, back when I thought we were building something real together. They walked directly past my table without noticing me, too caught up in their bubble of stolen intimacy to pay attention to their surroundings. I watched them settle into a corner booth, David's hand resting possessively on Chloe's thigh as she leaned into him, like he was her whole world. For a moment, I almost lost my nerve. Seeing them together, seeing how natural and comfortable they looked, made the reality of my marriage's end feel final in a way that photographs and investigation reports never could. But then Chloe laughed at something David said, throwing her head back into light, and the sound snapped me back to my purpose. This woman was laughing while sitting across from my husband, wearing jewelry he'd bought with our money, planning a future with a man who was lying to both of us. I finished my martini, left cash on the table, and walked directly to their booth. "Hello, David." His face went white so fast I thought he might faint. Chloe looked confused, glancing between us with dawning alarm as she realized something was very wrong. "Lillian?" David's voice cracked on my name. "What are you? How did you?" "You must be Chloe," I said, extending my hand to the younger woman with a smile that felt sharp enough to cut glass.
"I'm Lillian,
David's wife. Chloe's mouth fell open as she stared at my outstretched hand like it was a snake. "Wife. But David said you were separated. He said you were getting divorced. Did he?" I slid into the booth beside her, forcing her to scoot over as David sat frozen across from us. "That's interesting because we just renewed our mortgage last month. Joint application, both signatures required. It's amazing what you can accomplish when you're happily married." "David." Chloe turned to him with confusion and hurt written across her young face. "You said." "I can tell you exactly what he said," I interrupted gently, pulling out my phone and scrolling to the screenshots I'd prepared. "He told you our marriage was a sham, that we were only staying together for financial reasons, that he'd be free to marry you within 6 months. Am I close?" The color drained from Chloe's face as she realized I knew everything. David looked like he was going to be sick. "Chloe, honey," I continued in the same gentle tone, "David has been married to me for 8 years. We own a house together, we share bank accounts, we file joint tax returns. Last month, he bought me flowers for our anniversary and told me I was the love of his life. Yesterday, he borrowed my car to meet you." "Your car?" Chloe's voice was barely a whisper. "The Mercedes you've been posting on Instagram? The one you've been driving to work, to shopping, to wherever David takes you. That's my car, registered in my name, insured by me, paid for with money for my job." Chloe turned to stare at David, who still hadn't found his voice. I could see her mind working, connecting dots, realizing how thoroughly she'd been deceived. Everything he's bought you. I continued relentlessly. Every dinner, every gift, every night in hotel rooms like this one, he paid for with money from our joint accounts. You've been living off my income, driving my car, and sleeping with my husband. How does that make you feel? I didn't know, Chloe whispered, tears starting to fall. I swear I didn't know he was lying. I believe you, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. Looking at her young, devastated face, I realized that Chloe was as much a victim of David's deception as I was. You're 22 years old. You trusted a man who told you he loved you, who promised you a future together. You couldn't have known he was lying about everything. David finally found his voice. Lillian, let me explain. Explain what? I turned to face him, and the fury in my voice made both him and Chloe flinch. Explain how you've been stealing money from our joint accounts to fund your affair? Explain how you've been using my car to transport your mistress? Explain how you've been lying to both of us for months. It's not what it looks like. It's exactly what it looks like, David. It's adultery, it's financial abuse, and it's about to become the most expensive mistake of your life. I stood up from the booth, smoothing my dress, as both of them stared at me. Chloe, you seem like a nice girl who got involved with the wrong man. I'd suggest you find someone closer to your own age who doesn't have a wife at home. David, I turned to my husband. My lawyer will be in touch on Monday. I'd recommend you find one of your own. Lillian, wait. David started to rise from his seat, but I held up a hand to stop him. Oh, and David? I bought a new car today.
A Porsche 911 Carrera.
Midnight blue, cream leather interior, every upgrade available. It cost more than you make in 6 months, and I paid for it entirely with money from our joint savings account. You know, the same account you've been raiding to impress your girlfriend. His face went from white to green as he processed the financial implications. The keys to my Mercedes are on the kitchen counter at home. I figured since Chloe has been using it so much, she might as well have it. Consider it a parting gift from both of us. I turned and walked away from the table, my heels clicking confidently on the marble floor. Behind me, I could hear Chloe crying and David's voice frantically trying to explain, but their drama was no longer my problem. The valet brought my new Porsche around, and as I settled into the driver's seat, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, complete control over my own life. The drive home gave me time to process what had just happened. I had confronted my cheating husband and his mistress, delivered the news that would end both relationships, and emerged from the encounter feeling powerful rather than devastated. It was exactly the kind of revenge I had planned, surgical and devastating. But as I pulled into our driveway and saw our house lit up against the evening sky, I realized that my revenge was far from over. The real consequences were just beginning. David didn't come home that night or the next morning. I spent Saturday in strange peace, drinking coffee from our expensive machine, reading in our perfectly decorated living room, and occasionally glancing at my Mercedes keys sitting unused on the counter. Around noon, my phone rang with a call from an unknown number. Mrs. Thompson? This is Officer Martinez with the NYPD. We have your husband David here at the station. He's asking us to call you. My heart raced as I imagined worst-case scenarios. Is he hurt? What happened?
He's not injured, ma'am.
He was arrested last night for public intoxication and disturbing the peace. Apparently, he was causing a scene at a hotel bar, and when security tried to remove him, he became belligerent. The hotel bar. David had gotten drunk after I left and made such a spectacle that he was arrested. Part of me felt a twinge of satisfaction, but mostly I just felt tired. He's asking if you can post bail and come pick him up. I thought about my husband of 8 years, sitting in a jail cell because he couldn't handle being confronted with the consequences of his own actions. I thought about all the lies, all the money he'd spent on another woman, All the nights I'd worried about our marriage while he was building a second life. Tell him to call someone else, I said finally. I'm not available.
Mang?
Are you sure? He seems pretty desperate to reach you. Officer Martinez, I'm in the middle of divorcing my husband for adultery. He has friends, he has family, and he has a girlfriend who might be willing to help him. I am not his emergency contact anymore. I hung up the phone and realized I meant every word. For the first time in 8 years, David's problems were not my problems to solve. Sunday afternoon brought another call, this time from David's sister Rebecca. Lillian, what the hell is going on? David called me crying, saying you left him stranded at a police station, that you're divorcing him, that you took all the money from your savings account. This doesn't sound like you at all. Rebecca had always been neutral in our marriage, friendly, but not particularly close. I'd always respected her directness, and I decided she deserved an honest explanation. Rebecca, did David tell you about Chloe? Chloe? Who's Chloe? His 22-year-old girlfriend. The one he's been having an affair with for at least 4 months. The one he's been spending our money on. The one he's been letting drive my car. Silence on the other end of the line. He's been cheating on you? Extensively. Hotel rooms twice a week, expensive dinners, jewelry, the works. All paid for with money from our joint accounts while he told me we needed to be more careful about our budget.
Jesus Christ, Lilia.
I had no idea. He told me you two were having problems, that you'd grown apart, but he never mentioned another woman. Well, now you know why I'm not rushing to bail him out of jail or fix his problems anymore. Rebecca sighed deeply. I'm so sorry. I can't believe he would do this to you. You've been nothing but good to him, and to our whole family. Her support meant more than I'd expected. For months, I'd been questioning my own perceptions, wondering if I was being paranoid or unreasonable. Having David's own sister validate my feelings was incredibly healing. What do you need from me? Rebecca asked. Nothing. I just need you to know that when David tells his version of this story, and he will, there's more to it than whatever sob story he comes up with. Monday morning arrived with the satisfaction of knowing that David was about to have the worst day of his professional life. While he was presumably dealing with the aftermath of his arrest and trying to figure out where to sleep, I was implementing the final phase of my plan. Patricia had prepared divorce papers that were both comprehensive and devastating. David would be served at his office, or rather, at what used to be his office, since Patricia had included a clause requiring him to vacate the marital home immediately upon service. But before the papers were served, I had one more surprise for my unfaithful husband. At 10 a.m., I called David's 3 biggest clients, the ones who provided the majority of his consulting income. I'd always been friendly with these contacts, having met them at holiday parties and company events over the years. Hi, this is Lillian Thompson, David's wife. I'm calling to let you know that there are going to be some changes in David's business situation that might affect your ongoing projects. Each conversation was carefully calibrated. I didn't badmouth David or reveal details of our personal situation. I simply informed them, in professional terms, that David would be transitioning his business operations due to significant changes in his personal circumstances and that there might be disruptions to his availability and service quality in the coming months. We wanted you to hear this directly from us rather than being surprised by any interruptions in service, I explained to each client. David will of course fulfill his existing commitments, but given the circumstances, you might want to consider your contingency plans. By noon, all 3 clients had called David to express concern about the stability of their ongoing projects. 2 of them decided to accelerate their timelines and bring the work in-house rather than risk disruption. The 3rd requested an immediate meeting to reassess the relationship. David's consulting business, built over 8 years with clients who trusted him partly because of the stability I had provided, began crumbling within hours. The divorce papers were served at 2 p.m., just as David was presumably trying to manage the client crisis. The process server found him at a coffee shop near our house, looking haggard and desperate as he made phone calls trying to salvage his professional relationships. Patricia had included a detailed financial affidavit with the papers, documenting every hotel charge, every restaurant bill, every purchase that could be traced to David's affair. The numbers were staggering when added up over 4 months, nearly $15,000 of marital funds spent on another woman. But the most devastating part of the paperwork was the restraining order that prohibited David from returning to our house, accessing our joint accounts, or contacting me except through our attorneys. He was effectively homeless, broke, and alone, exactly the position he had put me in emotionally for months. Wednesday brought news that David had been forced to move in with his friend Marcus, sleeping on a couch in a studio apartment because he couldn't afford a hotel after I'd frozen our joint accounts. Marcus, who had always been polite but never particularly warm toward me, called Wednesday evening. "Lillian, I don't know what happened between you and David, and it's not really my business, but he's in pretty bad shape. He's been crying for 3 days straight, saying his life is over, that he's lost everything." Marcus, did he tell you about Chloe? Another pause as yet another person learned about David's double life. He mentioned there was someone else, but he said it wasn't serious, that it was a mistake. 4 months of hotel rooms, $15,000 in expenses, and letting her drive my car. If that's not serious, I'd hate to see what David considers a committed relationship.
$15,000? Jesus, Lilia.
Marcus, I appreciate that you're trying to help, and you're a good friend for giving David a place to stay. But he made choices that destroyed our marriage and put both of us in financial jeopardy. The consequences he's experiencing now are the direct result of his own actions. I understand. He keeps saying he wants to fix things with you, that he'll do anything to make it right. There's nothing to fix. There's only the divorce settlement to negotiate and the property to divide. David should focus on rebuilding his life instead of trying to resurrect something he systematically destroyed. Thursday brought the final twist in my revenge story, one I hadn't planned, but that felt like poetic justice delivered by the universe itself. Patricia called with news that made me laugh out loud for the first time in months. "You're not going to believe this," she said, barely containing her own amusement. "David's attorney just called. Apparently, his girlfriend has disappeared." Disappeared? Chloe Morrison quit her job on Tuesday and moved out of her apartment. No forwarding address, no contact information, nothing. David is apparently frantic trying to find her. The irony was perfect. David had destroyed his marriage for a woman who vanished the moment she realized he had lied about everything. He had given up 8 years of stability, financial security, and genuine partnership for someone who couldn't handle 3 days of reality. "There's more," Patricia continued. "My contact at the hotel says David has been calling them repeatedly, trying to get information about Chloe, asking if she's made any reservations. Hotel security finally told him to stop calling or they'd contact the police about harassment. David had lost everything: his wife, his home, his business stability, his financial security, and now, even the mistress he'd thought was worth all that sacrifice. He was completely alone, sitting on Marcus's couch, trying to figure out how his perfect plan to have everything had resulted in him losing everything. Friday afternoon, exactly 1 week after I'd confronted them at the hotel, I received a handwritten letter slipped under my front door. David's handwriting was shakier than usual, his words desperate and rambling. "Lillian, I know you probably won't read this, but I have to try. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Not just the affair, but thinking I could lie to you, thinking you wouldn't find out, thinking I could have both lives without consequences. You were always smarter than me, always more strategic, and I was an idiot to think I could outsmart you. I know you hate me now, and you have every right to. I threw away the best thing in my life for something that wasn't even real. Chloe is gone, my clients are leaving, I have nowhere to live, and all I can think about is how perfect our life was before I ruined everything. I don't expect forgiveness, But I needed you to know that losing you is the worst punishment I could ever receive. You didn't just take away my comfort or my money or my security. You took away my future because you were my future, and I was too stupid to realize it until it was too late. Reading his letter, I felt a complex mix of emotions. Sadness for the marriage we'd lost, satisfaction that he finally understood the magnitude of his mistakes, and relief that I had found the strength to walk away from someone who could deceive me so completely. But mostly, I felt free. The divorce proceedings moved quickly once David realized he had no leverage and no realistic hope of reconciliation. Patricia's documentation was so thorough that his attorney advised him to accept our initial settlement offer rather than risk going to trial. I kept the house, as expected, and David's share of the equity would be paid out over time rather than requiring an immediate sale. His consulting business, what remained of it, stayed with him, but he would continue working from the home office until he could afford to lease commercial space. The financial settlement was more favorable than I dared hope. Between the documented affair expenses and David's reduced earning capacity after losing major clients, the court awarded me 70% of our joint assets plus spousal support for 2 years. But the most satisfying part of the settlement wasn't financial. It was a clause that Patricia had insisted on including. David was permanently prohibited from making any claims on my future earnings, properties, or assets. Anything I built from this point forward would be entirely mine, completely protected from any future attempts he might make to re-enter my life. 6 months after that night at the hotel, I was living a completely different life. The house that had once felt like a stage set for playing the perfect wife had become a sanctuary where I could finally be myself. I'd redecorated David's former office into an art studio, something I'd always wanted but never had space for. My career had flourished without the distraction of a failing marriage. I'd been promoted to senior vice president, with a salary increase that more than made up for any financial uncertainty from the divorce. I was traveling for work again, something David had always discouraged, visiting clients in London, Tokyo, and Sydney. Most importantly, I'd rediscovered who I was when I wasn't trying to be someone's perfect wife. I was funnier than I'd remembered, more adventurous, more confident. I started taking art classes, joined a hiking group, and began dating again when I felt ready. The men I dated now were different from David. They were secure enough to appreciate my success rather than feeling threatened by it. They were honest about their intentions rather than trying to manage multiple relationships through deception. They were partners rather than projects. One evening in late spring, almost exactly a year after discovering David's affair, I was driving home from a gallery opening in my Porsche when I saw a familiar figure walking along the sidewalk. David looked older, thinner, carrying what appeared to be a portfolio case, and wearing a suit that had seen better days. I could have driven past, pretended not to see him, but curiosity got the better of me. I pulled over and rolled down my window. David. He turned, and the change in his appearance was shocking. His face was gaunt, his hair graying at the temples, his eyes holding a defeated expression I'd never seen before. Lillian. His voice was hoarse, surprised. You look incredible. I was wearing a black dress I'd bought for the gallery opening, my hair styled in a way that made me feel sophisticated and powerful. I looked like a woman who had not just survived betrayal but had thrived because of it. Thank you. How are you doing, David? He started, then seemed to realize that honesty was probably his only option. I'm not doing great. I'm staying in a one-bedroom apartment in Queens, trying to rebuild my client base, working mostly with startups who can't afford established consultants. I'm sorry to hear that. Are you? He asked, and there was no accusation in his voice, just genuine curiosity. I considered the question seriously. Was I sorry that David was struggling? A year ago, I might have been. The woman who had loved him for 8 years, who had planned a future with him, might have felt guilty about his reduced circumstances. But the woman I had become understood that David's struggles were the natural consequences of David's choices. I hadn't destroyed his life. He had destroyed his life, and I had simply refused to let him destroy mine in the process. "I'm sorry that it came to this," I said finally. "I'm sorry that you made choices that hurt all of us. But I'm not sorry that I protected myself from the consequences of those choices." He nodded slowly, accepting the distinction. "I heard you got promoted. Senior VP. "Yes." "That's great, Lillian. It's what you always deserved." We stood there for a moment in the awkward space between what we used to be and what we had become. Two people who had once shared everything, now separated by decisions that couldn't be undone. "David," I said finally, "I hope you find your way to a better life. I hope you learn from what happened and build something real next time." "Thank you," he said, and I could see that he meant it. "For what it's worth, seeing you now, seeing how well you're doing, it makes me realize that leaving you was the stupidest thing I ever did. Not because of the money or the house or any of that, but because you're an incredible woman, and I traded incredible for easy." It was perhaps the most honest thing David had said to me in years, and it gave me a sense of closure I hadn't realized I needed. "Take care of yourself, David." "You too, Lillian." I drove away without looking back, and for the first time since discovering his affair, I felt genuinely at peace with how everything had ended. But the story doesn't end there, because life has a way of surprising you just when you think you've written the final chapter. 3 months later, I was having dinner at an upscale restaurant downtown with James, a fellow executive I'd been seeing for 2 months, when I noticed a familiar blonde woman at the bar. Chloe Morrison, looking older and more sophisticated than she had a year ago, was having an animated conversation with a man in an expensive suit. During a lull in my conversation with James, I excused myself and approached the bar. "Chloe?" She turned, and her face went through a series of expressions before settling on embarrassed recognition. "Lillian."
E. How are you?
"I heard you left town after everything happened." "I did. I moved to Boston, got a job at a tech startup, tried to start over." She paused, studying my face. "I owe you an apology." "No, you don't. You were lied to just as much as I was." "Maybe, but I should have questioned things more. When someone tells you his marriage is over, but he can't introduce you to his friends or family, when he can only see you at hotels, when he's secretive about his phone calls." I knew something wasn't right, but I wanted to believe him so badly that I ignored all the red flags. "You were 22. We all make mistakes when we're learning about relationships." "That's generous of you." Chloe looked down at her hands. "I wanted to ask you something, and I know this is weird, but was David always a liar? Or did something change that made him capable of deceiving both of us?" It was a thoughtful question, one I'd wondered about myself during the long process of untangling our marriage. "I think David was always someone who took the path of least resistance," I said slowly. "When telling the truth was easy, he told the truth. When lying was easier, he lied. The problem was that once he started lying, each lie required more lies to support it, until he was living in a completely fabricated reality." "Do you think he loved either of us?" "Really? I think David loved the idea of being loved. He loved having a wife who supported his career and a girlfriend who made him feel young and exciting. But real love requires honesty, sacrifice, and putting someone else's needs before your own. David was never capable of that." Chloe nodded thoughtfully. "Thank you for being so kind about all this. When I ran away after that night at the hotel, I was so ashamed. I kept thinking about how I'd been driving your car, spending your money, believing I was building a future with someone who belonged to someone else. We were both victims of the same man's selfishness," I said. "There's no reason for us to be enemies." "How did you get over it?" "The betrayal, the humiliation, having your life turned upside down." I thought about the question, remembering the rage and devastation of those early days, the careful planning of my revenge, the satisfaction of watching David's world crumble, and finally, the peace of building a new life. I decided that David's betrayal said everything about his character and nothing about my worth. I said, I refused to let his inability to appreciate what we had make me question my value. And then I focused on building something better. Something better? A life that's entirely mine. A career that fulfills me. Relationships based on honesty and mutual respect. Financial security that no one can take away from me. David thought he was trading up when he chose you over our marriage. What he actually did was free me to create something much better than what we'd had. Chloe smiled for the first time since I'd approached her. That's a much healthier way to look at it than how I've been thinking about it. How have you been thinking about it? Like I'm damaged goods. Like I'll never be able to trust anyone again because I was so wrong about David. Chloe, you're 23 years old. You have decades ahead of you to build amazing relationships with people who deserve your trust. Don't let one manipulative man in your early 20s define how you see yourself or your future. We talked for a few more minutes about her job in Boston, her plans for the future, and her gradual process of rebuilding her confidence. When I returned to my table, James asked who I'd been talking to. Someone from my past, I said. Someone who helped me realize how far I've come. As James and I finished our dinner, talking about his upcoming business trip to Europe and my latest project at work, I reflected on the unexpected gift of running into Chloe. Seeing her again, having that conversation, had shown me that my revenge on David had been complete in ways I'd never anticipated. David hadn't just lost his wife, his home, and his financial security. He had lost two women who could have loved him genuinely if he had been capable of honesty. He had lost the respect of his clients, his friends, and his family. Most importantly, he had lost any realistic chance of rebuilding the kind of life he'd thrown away because his deception had been so thorough that no one would ever fully trust him again. Meanwhile, both Chloe and I had moved on to better lives, armed with hard-won wisdom about red flags and self-worth. We had both learned that we deserved partners who chose us completely, not men who tried to manage multiple relationships through lies and manipulation. The final twist in this story came 6 months later, in a form I never could have predicted. I was at a charity gala for my company, networking with potential clients, and enjoying an evening of champagne and conversation, when my assistant approached me with an urgent expression. Lillian, there's a reporter here from the Wall Street Journal who wants to speak with you about your ex-husband. My blood went cold. What about my ex-husband? Apparently, he's been arrested for fraud. Something about falsifying financial documents to secure client contracts. The reporter wants a comment from you as his former spouse. The room seemed to spin as I processed this information. David, desperate to rebuild his consulting business after losing his major clients, had apparently resorted to fraud to secure new contracts. The man who had once run a legitimate business had crossed the line into criminal behavior. I declined to comment to the reporter, but I called Patricia immediately. I just heard, she said before I could speak. David was arrested this morning. Federal charges for wire fraud and tax evasion. Apparently, he's been inflating his qualifications and falsifying financial records to win government contracts he wasn't qualified for. How bad is it? If convicted, he could face up to 20 years in federal prison. But Lillian, this doesn't affect you at all. The crimes occurred after your divorce was final, and the financial liability clause we included protects you from any claims related to his business activities. 20 years in prison. David had gone from cheating husband to federal criminal in less than 2 years, each bad decision leading to worse decisions until he had destroyed not just his marriage and his business, but potentially his freedom. That night, as I sat in my beautiful home with a glass of wine and my latest art project, I realized that my revenge had been more complete than I ever could have planned. I had simply removed myself from David's destructive path and protected my assets. Everything else, his homelessness, his business failure, his turn to criminal behavior, had been the natural progression of his own character flaws. I had driven away in something he couldn't afford, both literally and metaphorically. The Porsche had been just a symbol. What David really couldn't afford was the cost of his deception, losing a woman who had loved him genuinely, a life built on mutual respect and shared goals, and ultimately, his integrity and freedom. As I prepared for bed that night in my peaceful home, I felt grateful for everything that had happened, even the betrayal that had started it all. David's affair had been devastating, but it had also been liberating. It had forced me to see our relationship clearly, to value myself appropriately, and to build a life that belonged entirely to me. I never saw David again after that encounter on the sidewalk. I heard through mutual friends that he was serving a sentence at a minimum security federal facility, that he had lost everything he'd worked for, that he spent his days in prison thinking about the choices that had led him there. But David's story was no longer my story. My story was about a woman who had refused to let betrayal define her, who had channeled anger into strategic action, who had transformed devastating loss into unprecedented freedom. And every time I drove my Porsche, every time I walked through my beautiful home, every time I made a decision based solely on what I wanted rather than what someone else needed, I remembered the most important lesson of the whole experience. The best revenge is a life so good that your betrayer could never afford it, no matter how much money they had. The ultimate twist reveals that David's downfall extended far beyond the divorce. His desperation to rebuild after losing everything led him to commit federal fraud, resulting in a 20-year prison sentence. What started as marital infidelity escalated into criminal behavior, showing how one betrayal can spiral into complete self-destruction.